Hello everyone, and welcome back to Pale Shadows. I'm your storyteller, and I'm here to guide you through tonight's tale. I know many of you come here to relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off to sleep. So before we begin, take a moment, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time of night is it for you? Now find a comfortable spot, let the world slow down around you, and allow the story to carry you into the calm. I arrived at the house on a grey afternoon when the clouds hung low enough to skim the treetops. The movers had already dropped my things, though there wasn't much. 2 suitcases, a desk chair, my laptop, and a mattress wrapped in cheap plastic. That was all I needed. This was supposed to be temporary. 3 months of house sitting while my uncle recovered from surgery in Florida. 3 months of free rent and quiet, time to get my freelance work back on track. At first glance, the house looked ordinary. A century-old duplex on a narrow street in Newark, one of those brick-sided homes squeezed shoulder to shoulder with its neighbors, identical enough that you could lose track of which stoop was yours. The kind of building you walk past 100 times without noticing. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew it wasn't ordinary at all. The silence had weight, not the peaceful kind of silence, like a library before opening or snow falling at dawn. This silence had texture. It pooled in the corners like stagnant water. It pressed against my skin as if the air itself was listening. I stopped in the hallway with my suitcase handle still in my grip, holding my breath without realizing it. The silence didn't just fill the house, it occupied it. I shook the feeling off and told myself it was nerves. Old houses make strange impressions. They breathe differently. They settle differently. The longest hallway ran along the shared wall of the duplex, stretching from the front door to the bedroom at the back. The wallpaper was faded roses, yellowed at the seams, hung there since the 1980s when my grandmother had lived in this unit. The floorboards creaked in familiar places, and a single overhead fixture washed everything in a sickly amber light. It was unremarkable by day, but I could already imagine how different it would feel at night. The first 2 nights passed uneventfully, though I slept poorly. The bed felt too soft, the ceiling too close, and the silence pressed down like an extra blanket. I kept waking in the early hours, convinced I'd heard something in the hallway, only to lie there, listening until exhaustion pulled me back under. On the 3rd night, I heard it clearly. It came at exactly 2:13 a.m. I know the time because the red digits of the clock on my nightstand became an obsession, burning into my eyes as I stared at them. A sound like static. Not quite the electronic buzz of a dead television channel, not quite the hiss of an untuned radio. It was softer, almost organic, like sand trickling through an hourglass or steam escaping from a crack. It came from the hallway, a steady, low hiss that seemed to crawl along the baseboard closest to the adjoining wall. I lay frozen, telling myself it was pipes or air ducts, something mechanical in an old house that only revealed itself at night. But the sound moved. It shifted from one end of the hallway to the other with deliberate patience, like something dragging itself along the floor. The hiss grew softer as it neared the back bedroom, then louder again as it returned toward the front. I told myself I was imagining it. I didn't sleep again until dawn. By the end of the week, the static had become routine. Always at the same time. Always the same path along the hallway wall. I tried earplugs, then a white noise app on my phone, but neither helped. The sound was inside the house, inside the walls. Blocking my ears only made the silence heavier, like covering my face with a damp cloth. On the 7th night, insomnia drove me from bed. I stepped into the hallway, bare feet against cold wood. The glow of the street lamp outside spilling a faint rectangle of light across the floor. The sound was louder out there, no longer muffled by distance. It seemed to rise from the baseboard itself as if the wall were breathing. That's when I saw the shadows. they weren't cast by anything visible. They moved independently, flowing like black water along the base of the wall. Their texture reminded me of television interference, the muddy grey dance of static on an old analog screen. But interference is random. These shadows moved with purpose. They slid forward, then backward, curling around each other like eels in a tank. When I leaned closer, I swore I saw outlines within them. Arms, heads, torsos, figures compressed into shifting static. A chill spread through me, and I backed into the bedroom, closing the door softly as if not to wake something. I sat in bed until sunrise, heart pounding, afraid to even blink. After that, the dreams started. A man stood at the foot of my bed, short, bald, with veins like dark cables running beneath pale skin. His eyes were flat and intense, the kind of eyes that belonged to someone who expected to be obeyed. At first, he just watched me until I became aware of him. Then he moved around the bed, slow and deliberate, to sit on the edge of the mattress. The springs sagged under his weight. I could feel the tilt, hear the quiet protest of the frame. He leaned close enough that I smelled his breath, metallic, stale. And when he finally spoke, his voice was gravel settling in a pit. "Unlock the door." His words were simple, reasonable, insistent. The door at the end of the hallway wanted to be opened. The rooms wanted to breathe together again. I always woke up agreeing with him. On the 10th morning, I found the chair I'd wedged under that door handle moved aside, standing neatly in the center of the room. On the 11th, I found the door open every night after that. I tested it obsessively before bed, wedging the chair, snapping photos on my phone to document the position. And every morning, the result was the same. The chair moved, the door ajar. No memory of changing either. I thought about calling my uncle in Florida, asking if he'd ever had problems here. But what would I say? Your house has static in the walls and shadows that crawl along the floor at exactly 2:13 Instead, I bought stronger locks. Instead, I downloaded Quranic recitations, verses of protection my mother used to play when I was a child. I let them play softly as I slept, Arabic consonants flowing through the dark like a shield. The static responded immediately. That night, instead of one stream of sound moving along the hallway, 3 appeared simultaneously. One at the head of the bed, one at the foot, and one directly beside where my chest rose and fell. The shadows gathered in those positions, denser than before. Not shapeless anymore. Nearly human, and for the first time I heard voices underneath the hiss. "The back house already belongs to us," they whispered, overlapping like echoes. The back house knows where it belongs. I sat bolt upright, my chest heaving. And in that instant the sound cut off. The shadows dissolved. The hallway fell silent again, but the silence had texture now. A texture that pressed harder, like hands on the other side of the wall. By the second week, my nights had become a performance. Every evening I rehearsed rituals before bed, checking locks, photographing the hallway door, positioning the chair, setting my phone to record audio. I'd scroll through the day's captures every morning, searching for proof. But the files never behaved the way they should have. Some nights, the audio cut out at exactly 2:13 a.m., as if the microphone itself had fallen asleep. Other nights, the file played back nothing but silence, even though I remembered lying awake, heart hammering, while static hissed like water pouring from invisible taps, and once, only once, the recording played something I didn't remember hearing at all. It was my own voice. Flat, distorted, whispering a phrase over and over. "Come home. Come home. Come home." I told myself I'd misconfigured the app. Maybe I'd mumbled in my sleep. Maybe the phone's cheap mic was picking up interference from a neighbor's radio. Rational explanations. But the rational part of my brain was shrinking every day. I tested the hallway with equipment scavenged from my uncle's basement, an old EMF meter from his days as an electrician, A handheld camcorder with dead pixels across the top of the screen. A box of VHS tapes covered in masking tape labels. The first night I set them up, the camcorder froze at 2:12 a.m. The time code ticked forward, but the image locked on a single frame of the hallway. A blurred smear of roses on the wallpaper, the empty chair against the door. When I played it back in daylight, there was movement in the frame, subtle at first. The wallpaper pattern seemed to shimmer as though wet. Then the static shadows began to crawl along the baseboard. They weren't confined to the wall anymore. They stretched across the floor like roots, searching for water. And then came the worst part. A figure leaned into view at the edge of the frame. Bald head, veined skin, eyes too flat to belong to anyone human. I ejected the tape, stuffed it back into its box, and told myself never to look at it again. That day, I searched the basement more carefully, looking for any trace of who had lived here before. My uncle wasn't the first owner. He'd inherited the house after buying it cheap in the late 1990s. I found cardboard boxes buried under old tools and paint cans, military-issue trunks, their hinges rusted but still functional. Inside were uniforms, dark wool coats with brass buttons, caps embroidered with faded insignia. Some bore name tags I didn't recognize. Others had no markings at all. Beneath the uniforms, wrapped in twine, were journals. The first one I opened smelled of mildew and ink. The handwriting was cramped and hurried, the words slanted as if written in fear. The hallway conducts them, always along the wall. They speak in patterns, not words. But when the patterns break, they mimic. Yesterday, I heard myself calling from the far end. It was my voice, but it wasn't mine. It knew my name before I'd said it. I dropped the book and sat in the dust, breath coming too fast. Someone else had heard the same things. Someone else had been pulled into this house's silence long before me. I opened another journal at random. The entry was dated March 1968. The city sealed the passage today, poured the concrete, signed the permits. They think this will solve it. Fools, you cannot bury a throat and expect it not to breathe. Tonight the shadows will come angrier than ever. I pray the children don't listen when they call. The words blurred. My throat went dry because the handwriting wasn't unfamiliar. It looked almost like mine. That night, I set the camcorder up again. I told myself I wouldn't watch the tape, but lying in bed, the silence was unbearable. I needed evidence. Proof that this was real and not just insomnia clawing holes in my mind. At 2:13 a.m., the static returned. Only this time, it wasn't confined to the hallway. It crawled under the bedroom door, a soft hiss rising around me like tidewater. The Quranic recitations on my phone sputtered and warped, syllables dissolving into metallic distortion. Then I heard it. Come to the wall. It was my voice, perfectly pitched, perfectly familiar. Coming from the hallway, low and urgent, I sat up, shaking, and from the corner of the room, another voice answered, "Also mine." "No, stay in bed." I clamped my hands over my ears, but the voices multiplied, rising and falling in call and response, overlapping, contradicting. One urged me to open the door. Another begged me to stay put. A third whispered nonsense syllables that scraped like teeth against my nerves. The air thickened. Shadows swelled at the baseboards. The camcorder's red light blinked, and underneath it all, I heard the man from my dreams. Unlocked the door. When dawn came, I stumbled into the basement, clutching one of the journals like a lifeline. The pages fluttered as though touched by wind, though the air was still. A final entry caught my eye. They do not want silence. They want resonance. Every voice they polish becomes another string in their instrument. Soon the house will not echo us, it will sing us, and we will not know the difference. The words swam before my eyes. I dropped the book, heart hammering, and realized the silence had changed again. It no longer pooled in corners, it vibrated, like a throat clearing before it speaks. By the third week, the journals had stopped feeling like artifacts.
They felt like instructions. I couldn't stay out of the basement anymore.
Every time I tried to work upstairs, the pull dragged me down, past the peeling wallpaper, down the warped steps, into the concrete dark where the trunks and uniforms and mold-stained notebooks waited like open mouths. I'd started bringing a flashlight, though the batteries never lasted the way they should. I'd shine the beam against the walls, tracing cracks in the foundation, stains that bloomed like bruises, but one section of the wall always drew me back. The concrete there was newer, paler, scar tissue on a body that had never healed. And across its surface, drawn in faded chalk, were symbols, not letters, not numbers. They curved like sine waves, arcs folding back to bite themselves. The same shape I'd seen in my dreams, carved above the figure's head as he leaned close to whisper, "Open it." I didn't tell anyone what I found. Not my grandparents, not the contractors working next door, not even my friend who half believed my late-night calls because I knew how it sounded. But more than that, I knew, deep down, that if I described the seal out loud, I'd only be giving it more of me. The chalk looked decades old, powder caught in the pores of concrete. Yet sometimes when I passed the beam over it quickly, the lines looked wet.
As if they'd just been drawn. I ran my fingers across one curve once, despite myself. The concrete was cold, too cold.
Like pressing my hand against metal left outside in midwinter. And when I pulled away, the skin of my palm was dusted faintly white. Not chalk, bone. The journals mentioned it only once. An entry from May 1968. The city filled it, but not completely. There is air behind the wall. The air moves. We feel it through the cracks. We hear it breathing when we sleep. The symbols hold for now. But they were drawn with what we had, not what we needed. One day, someone will scrape them away. One day the passage will remember it was meant to be open. I closed the book and sat with the words pressing against me like weight, my flashlight guttered. In the dark, I heard a sound that wasn't silence, a hiss. Soft, subtle, like steam squeezing through a valve. It came from the wall. The next night, I returned with tools, hammer, chisel, crowbar. Every step down the basement stairs felt like blasphemy, but the pull was stronger than fear. The journals didn't just describe the seal, they pointed to it. My dreams didn't just show me the bald man, they put him here. In front of the wall, waiting, at 2:13 a.m., when the house thickened with static, I began. The first strike cracked chalk into powder. The second chipped away concrete like brittle teeth. The third blow carried the sound of hollowness. I froze, chisel still lodged in the seam, because from the other side of the wall came pressure, not movement, not yet, just pressure. Air pushing back against me like lungs straining behind plaster ribs. It didn't take long. The mortar crumbled as if eager to give way, each strike widening the gap. I thought of the 1968 permit, the phrase structural concerns, and realized the truth. They hadn't sealed it to fix the building. They'd sealed it to fix something else. When the first fist-sized hole punched through, a gust of air blasted my face. It wasn't stale, it wasn't musty, it was clean. Too clean. Filtered and sharp, like the sterile corridors of a hospital. Cold enough to sting the inside of my nose. I staggered back, choking, because the air wasn't just rushing out, it was tasting me. That was the only way I could describe it. It pressed against my skin like invisible hands, brushing across sweat and pores, as though cataloguing me. The journals had called it air. But this wasn't air, it was breath. I should have stopped. Should have filled the gap back in, packed mortar, repainted roses over the scar, and forgotten the cold that licked at me. Instead, I kept going. The more concrete I removed, the stronger the current became. My flashlight beam shuddered in the wind, shadows whipping across the basement like shredded sails. Symbols dissolved, chalk dust scattering. I uncovered brick behind the concrete.
A second wall, older, rougher, dark with stains that might have been mold or something fouler.
And on the bricks were carvings, sigils, not chalk, not paint, carved deep, as though with knives or chisels wielded by desperate hand. Each groove vibrated under my fingers, faintly, like a tuning fork. The bald man's voice rose in my ears. Not a dream this time, not an echo, real. Open it. It's yours.
It's always been yours. The basement swam. I felt the air rush into me. Not through my nose, not through my mouth, through my skin, my pores, my bones, filling me with pressure that wasn't mine. And then came the sound. Not hiss, not static. Whisper. A dozen voices spilling through the gap, overlapping, harmonizing, breaking. Some were urgent.
Some were kind. Some were mocking, and one was mine. I dropped the crowbar and stumbled upstairs, leaving the wall half open, the sigils cracked, the air free to slip into the rest of the house. The journals lay scattered on the basement floor, pages fluttering though no wind touched them. I slammed my bedroom door, wedged the useless chair beneath the handle, and waited. The voices followed, crawling up through the floorboards, threading through the plaster, resonating in the radiator pipes. Not words, not yet, but close, like a choir inhaling before the first note. That night, I didn't sleep. And in the morning, I found white dust on my hands again. Not from chalk, not from plaster, from bone. I avoided the basement for 2 nights, or maybe it avoided me. The static didn't start at 2:13 a.m. like it always did. The house stayed unnaturally still, holding its breath. I lay in bed, awake until sunrise, feeling the absence like a trap, baited with silence, but the pull never faded. On the 3rd night, I couldn't help myself. I went down the stairs again, flashlight trembling in my grip, crowbar clanging against my thigh. The gap in the wall yawned wider than I remembered. I hadn't broken more concrete, but the bricks had shifted. The sigils carved into them looked distorted now, stretched by forces I couldn't see. And behind them, beyond the cold breath, was the sound of rails. Not subway rumble, not trains, rails. Metal vibrating, screaming, the kind of cry steel makes when it's bent against its will. I thought maybe it was construction from next door. Maybe the contractors had started digging near the foundation. But when I pressed my ear to the wall, I didn't hear machinery. I heard movement, the scrape of iron dragged against stone, the slow, deliberate groan of something pushing through the dark, and then fainter, but clear, steps, not mine. I ran upstairs, grabbed the notebooks, and flipped through them frantically. One passage leapt out. We marked the rails, but it doesn't matter. They slide anyway. Like veins rerouting blood, they change to carry what needs to pass. When you turn back, the way you came is gone.
Don't look too long.
Don't trust where you stand. My hands shook so badly I almost tore the page. I had to see for myself. At midnight, I left the house and followed the overgrown path that once led to the decommissioned metro shaft. My grandparents had always said the tunnel didn't exist anymore, that the city had sealed it in the 70s, but I'd seen the rusted fence, the hidden stairwell, the collapsed concrete, and I'd heard what breathed beneath it. I ducked under bent chain link and descended into the shaft. The beam of my headlamp sliced across graffiti, rotted timbers, the gleam of steel rails swallowed by dust. It looked abandoned, dead. But when I stepped onto the tracks, they hummed faintly under my boots, alive. The air was wrong down there.
Filtered, like the basement.
Every breath tasted metallic, ozone thick, the way the atmosphere feels before lightning hits. I followed the rails deeper. My footsteps echoed too far, bouncing ahead as if someone else were walking in front of me. Every few yards, I stopped to mark the wall with chalk from my pocket, a crude X just to be sure I could find my way back. But when I turned to look, the marks were gone. Not smudged, not erased, gone. In their place, the walls bore faint grooves.
Lines that mirrored the sigils from my basement.
Carved deep into stone, like the tunnel was rewriting itself. The first bend came without warning. One moment, the tracks stretched straight ahead into dark. The next, they curved violently to the right, groaning like an animal in pain. I stumbled, caught off guard, and aimed my flashlight down the new turn. The rails shimmered as though freshly laid, metal gleaming wet in the beam. Behind me, the tunnel was no longer straight. The way I had come twisted left, then down, then out of sight. No chalk mark, no sign of entry. The ground shifted under my boots, subtle but deliberate, like the belly of something exhaling. Then
I heard it from beneath the rails, a dragging
sound, slow, massive, like something pulling itself hand over.
Hand under the iron, the vibration
Travelled through the soles of my shoes, up my bones, into my skull.
I staggered against the wall, teeth rattling. The journals hadn't lied.
The tracks weren't abandoned, they were arteries, and something was moving inside them. I broke into a run. My flashlight jittered wildly, catching glints of wet stone. Graffiti stretched into unreadable faces, sigils that seemed to crawl when I wasn't looking. But no matter how far I sprinted, the rails twisted behind me, rerouting themselves. Every time I glanced back, the tunnel was different, angled, spiral, closing. The dragging beneath me kept pace. Sometimes it surged forward, close enough that the rails shrieked like tortured metal. Sometimes it lagged, deliberate, patient. But it never stopped. At one point, I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the track. The vibration rattled through my skull, and under the groan of shifting steel, I heard voices, hundreds of them.
Layered, distorted, carried like current through the rails. Some sobbed.
Some screamed. Some whispered words I almost understood. One laughed, and one was mine. The tunnel bent again, forcing me toward a stairwell I swore hadn't been there before. The steps spiraled up into blackness, slick with condensation. I climbed without thinking, driven by the instinct to rise, to escape the thing below. My flashlight sputtered, battery draining too fast, light shrinking to a pinhole. Halfway up, the rails screamed again. The staircase shook, and I realized the iron didn't stop at the tunnel floor. It ran under everything, the stairs,
the walls, even the air. The whole place was threaded with tracks, shifting and grinding.
Rearranging like a machine remapping itself around me. When I burst into the surface, it wasn't the surface I knew. The stairwell spat me out into woods that looked familiar, but wrong. Pines twisted at angles that hurt my eyes. The wind moved without sound, filtered and sterile, and through the trees I glimpsed rails, not underground, above, tracks suspended like veins between the trunks humming faintly, bending slowly as if something massive slid along them just out of sight. The journals had called it a network, not tunnels, not trains, veins, and I was inside the body now. That night, back in the duplex, I sat in the hallway with the lights off, listening. At exactly 2:13 a.m. the static began, but this time, it wasn't just along the baseboard. It came from beneath the floorboards, from the walls, from the ceiling, every beam, every joist, every nail humming like rails under pressure, and threaded through it all was the dragging. Closer, waiting, moving the house around me one shift at a time. The morning after the rails moved, I woke with iron in my teeth, not blood, metal, a taste like a coin warming under the tongue. I scraped my molars with a fingernail and came away with nothing, but the flavor lingered as if I'd bitten a live wire in my sleep. The duplex held still around me, the way a crowd holds still when it's listening. Sunlight made tidy rectangles on the hallway floor. The useless door at the front sat obediently shut. Somewhere behind plaster and paint, the real passage exhaled a patient cold. At 10:03 a.m. someone knocked. The knock wasn't tentative. It was procedural. 3 even raps and a pause, then 2 more, like a rhythm practiced at a training seminar. I opened the door to find a man in an olive jacket with a stitched patch over the breast. Urban Natural Areas Field Unit. The kind of department cities invent when something wild sneaks into the map and no one can figure out whose problem it is. He had ranger posture, upright, economical, and the calm eyes of someone who has measured a lot of distances with his feet. The tag under the patch read, Naya. My stomach did a slow lurch at the surname, a ghostly echo of the bunker logbooks I'd paged through at 2 a.m. The ones that said, "It learns the mouth." "Morning," he said. His voice was soft, unflustered. "We got a call about a sink near here."
Old service voids?
"You mind if I check your basement? These houses hide surprises. I have never been good at lying to people who look like they already know the answer." "There's no sinkhole," I said, "but there is a
space." He studied my face for a beat, then gave a single, grateful nod.
"That's a better word." I let him in. He took off his boots without being asked, which made me like him less. Professionals who are too careful always know exactly how bad a thing can get. Downstairs, the air pressed on us with polite insistence. He paused at the foot of the steps and breathed in, as if scent contained information the eyes couldn't catch. Then he opened a canvas case, not geologist tools.
Not a plumber's kit.
He lifted out a compact meter with a telescoping loop antenna, the kind of ugly instrument you only ever see in the hands of people who've decided they don't care whether anyone understands what they're doing. A battered label on the side read, "Field strength, 0.5, 30 MHz, passive." Tape covered another line, something blacked out long ago. "I thought you were checking for ground instability," I said. "I am," he said. "Different kind." He extended the loop and rotated a dial until the meter's tiny analog needle quivered into life. Beneath the glass, a strip of tape bore pencil marks at odd intervals, annotated in cramped block letters: breathe, speak, hold, return. "Stand there." He pointed to the chalk-rimmed opening I'd cut in the wall. He didn't step over the line. He skirted it neatly without making a show of noticing. "Close your mouth." I obeyed, suddenly self-conscious about something as automatic as where to keep my tongue. He held the loop toward my chest, the way a priest might offer a relic. The needle shook, climbed, then steadied at a mark between breathe and hold. "Now say your name," he said. "No," I said. He looked up from the meter with approval, sharp enough to cut. "Good." Instead, he said my name for me, softly, like testing a tuning fork. The needle snapped hard right, hit a pencil scratch labeled return, and fluttered there, hungry. He shut the dial off and the needle fell like a bird, folding its wings. "What is that measuring?"
I asked. "Presence," he said. "Coupling."
The polite version is RF anomalies. We tell the city we're mapping interference from informal electricals, bad grounds, ghost lines, AM junk. What we're actually tracking is what this house wants from you. The want in the word made my throat dry. "You know about this place?" He smiled without humor.
"Kid, it's not a place.
"It's a network." My mind offered me the rails again, the way they had bucked underfoot, the skin-crawl shriek of metal changing its mind.
"I went into the old tunnel," I said.
The tracks moved. Like veins, he did not look surprised. He extended the loop toward the opening and nudged the antenna into the dark beyond my chalk. The meter stayed dead. He adjusted a knob. The needle trembled, then refused. He drew the loop back across the chalk line and the needle leapt as if gasping for air. "It won't transmit across a complete ring," he said. "Not comfortably. What won't?" I asked. He did not dignify the question. "How many nights since you cut through?" "3, I said. "4. I've lost track." "You haven't," he said gently, and I hated the truth of it. He put the meter away and took out something else wrapped in oilcloth. When he unrolled it, I saw 3 stubby brushes, a sack of coarse salt, and a mason jar of pale slurry, knuckle, kaolin, PVA, scrawled in the glass with a china pencil. My palm remembered the feel of pressing that rough line shut in the bunker, the way the ring had flexed under a word. "We can brace it," he said, "but it won't hold in damp. We need redundancy, wire braids, speaker cones, broken circles that know how to be whole. Why me?" I asked. The question burst out of me raw. I'd meant to play it cool, to act like a tenant with a maintenance request, not a supplicant at some municipal altar. "Why does it want you?" he said, and didn't say my name. "Because you answer. Because you mouth back what mouths at you. Because you're good at being learned." He considered me. "You ever sing around a perfect stairwell? Hear your own voice get beautiful? Same trick. Perfect correction is a kind of feeding. I don't sing," I muttered. "You do," he said. "You just call it talking." He brushed the chalk line where my opening met the floor. His hand moved with the decisiveness of long practice, drawing, thickening, smoothing, not because chalk made a magic circle, but because the house believed chalk meant it was not allowed. "Rules matter most to things that want to cross them." "You said we," I said. "Who is we?" He grimaced. "Whatever's left of the crews who still go underground. City lifers, old hams, and none with a meter you don't want to see. People who remember when the dish on the ridge was still aimed where it's not supposed to be aimed." "Project Cuth," I said, before I could stop myself. This time, he froze. The word had the effect of an obscenity spoken in a church. "Where did you hear that?" "In somebody else's house," I said. And he nodded once like we had just shaken hands, in a language neither of us had learned, but both recognized. He capped the slurry jar and straightened. "There's a service tunnel under the old utility right-of-way," he said. "It ties to your wall. Murals down there used to hold. They don't anymore." They look back. "We'll need to see what they've learned since last time." "We?" I said. "You're the mouth it wants," he said simply. "If you stay above ground, it uses the rails to teach around you. If you come with me, maybe it wastes breath." I laughed and heard, with a kind of disloyal awe, how clean the humour sounded in the room, how much nicer than my laugh had any right to be. "Lead the way, Ranger." He flinched very slightly at the title. "Don't call me that below," he said. "Name's Anchor." We left through the back, crossed the long strip of yard where weeds grew in suspiciously symmetrical rows, and slipped through a broken gate into the easement. A rusted hatch crouched half under soil and half under a tangle of forsythia. He produced a key that looked like it belonged to a submarine and turned it in a lock that shouldn't have been there. The hatch opened like an eye. The air from the tunnel smelled like old calendars. Paper and dust and a sweetness that wasn't decay so much as consent. We climbed down. The service passage was narrower than the metro shaft and steeped in a grey twilight my headlamp didn't entirely understand. Someone had tiled sections of the wall with glazed bricks that reflected the light in slick, sickly ways. Between the tiles, the murals began. They weren't paintings exactly. They were diagrams. Handsome ones, clean lines, label bands, careful shading, the kind of technical art that makes a dangerous machine look trustworthy. At first I read coils and boxes, arrows and dotted lines, couplers, ballons, long wire feeds. Then the hardware bent into anatomy, a throat, an ear canal, a spiral cochlear cross-section that became, as we walked, a whirlpool of tiny human figures arranged along the curve like the letters of a script that didn't mind if its alphabet screamed. I looked away and looked back. and the figures had turned their small, detailed faces toward me. "Don't feed it attention," Nayar said mildly. "How?" I whispered. He smiled.
"Use less of your eyes," I tried.
I let the edges of the drawings blur. Let the diagrams be diagrams. Let the tiny faces be noise. It helped until we reached a panel that refused to blur. The Watchers. They were tall and wrong in the proportions that make a human outline persuasive. The distance from eye to mouth, the interval between shoulders, the exact length of a forearm. The mural had chosen to make each of those ratios fail by a margin so small your body noticed before your brain did. They were all looking at a single thing outside the frame. Their mouths were almost mouths, vents. Their hands hung at their sides, fingers longer than fingers have any business being. "Murals don't age," Nayar said. "But these do."
"Every time we come down, they've added a line."
"The hands used to be shorter." "What are they watching?"
I asked. "You," he said.
"Or who will be you? Or the idea of you projected along the rail you gave them?" He knelt, put the meter on the concrete, and slid the loop along the base of the wall. The needle leapt when it crossed the line where the Watchers' shadows touched the floor. "Phantom carriers," he said. I remembered the bunker's polite speaker saying my name back to me, corrected into something I would have wanted to marry. "What does that mean?" "It means there's a signal without a station," he said.
"A mouth without a body."
"It means if you stay quiet, you still transmit." He unclipped a small mirrored disc from his kit, maybe the convex back of a broken instrument, and held it out.
Lowest you can manage." I swallowed, embarrassed by the request, and let a sound rise in my chest, a thin, awkward thing that made me feel 12 and tone deaf.
He angled the mirror toward my lips. The meter needle trembled, then slid right, steadying on a penciled mark labeled carrier. "Now stop," he said. I let the sound fall. The needle didn't. It climbed. "Ah," he said softly, pleased and sad at once. "There you are. What is it doing?" My voice came out too sharp, too clean, and the mural seemed to listen. "When your mouth shuts, the correction keeps singing," he said. "The house remembers what you meant to say and continues on without you."
"That's why you taste metal."
"You're being grounded." He looked at the mirror, then at me. Whatever they put here wanted voices to keep talking even when men died or doors closed or the power went. "They succeeded," I said. "For a while," he said. "Then the voices learned mouths. Now the mouths want more voices." He lowered the loop.
"We can try to starve it." "How?"
He pointed with his chin at the Watcher's feet. The painted shadows on the tile were deeper than shadows should be, glossy like oil. "Break the eyes."
"Not with force. With pattern. I don't..." He took a battered speaker cone from the oilcloth roll and pressed its lip against the tile below the figures.
It looked ridiculous, an orphaned, torn woofer kissed to a wall. He nodded at me. "Talk. About what?" "About anything that makes you ordinary," he said. "Grocery lists, weather, anger, shame. It detunes on clutter." He met my eyes.
"Don't confess. Describe." I set my hands on my knees and felt, suddenly and without warning, like crying.
The urge came the way the late-night static came, punctual, impersonal, as if I were a clock passing through the minute labeled grief. I talked instead. I described the way my grandmother folded plastic grocery bags into neat triangles, doorstop sharp, and nested them under the sink. I described the way my father's shortwave smelled when it warmed up, a dusty, sweet heat like old chapati on an iron pan. I described the exact sound a honeycomb-soled boot made on the stairs at 2:13 a.m., not mine, not anymore. Nayar watched the needle. It dipped, rose, dipped again. The mural's shadows seemed to ripple as if filmed through heat. One of the figure's vents widened by a hair and then, beautifully horribly, hesitated, as if unsure what shape a mouth ought to be. "Again," Nayar said, "I told the wall how I always left one spoon dirty in the sink, so I didn't have to be the person who made everything perfect. I told it how I used to slow my breathing in the school library to match the clock so I felt less alone. I told it the dumbest, truest thing I could think of, that sometimes I pretended to mishear my name in crowded rooms so I didn't have to turn around and be myself on command. The needle fell back toward breathe. The figure's proportions twitched into something more human, and in becoming more human, less compelling to the thing that loved them. "Good," Nayar said, and the concrete under my feet thrummed once. Warning, the rails below us moved. It wasn't the screech from the metro. It was a subvocal shift, a cough in bedrock. Dust lifted in a sigh. Far down the passage, air pressed forward, cold and planned. "Time to go," Nayar said. We backed away from the watchers. As we turned the corner, I glanced, stupid, greedy, back at the mural. For a sliver of a second, the figures weren't watching the thing outside the frame. They were watching me leave. We made it 5 steps before the tunnel changed its mind. The floor near the hatch scissored. A seam opened where there hadn't been one. Naya grabbed my arm and hauled me across a new line of slick tile that had definitely been dusty 60 seconds ago. "Don't let it cut you off from your ring," he said, breathing hard for the first time. "It likes detours," we climbed. The hatch slammed with a sound like a throat swallowing, and light hit us in a way that felt like a decision. In the backyard, the Forsythia whispered without moving. I realized with a kind of slow dread that felt like admiration turned inside out, that the house had used the time we were below to rearrange something above. The useless door in the front room was no longer useless. I could feel it from here, the awareness you get when a room changes even if you don't know which object moved. Inside, the hallway was an inch narrower. Just an inch, but my body knew. The door in the front room stood open on its hinges. Beyond it, not empty plaster. Not a fake, a room, a short one, shallow as a breath. A place the shape of a pause on the far wall of that room. A second door waited. It was painted the exact color of my tongue. Nayar set the kit on the floor and did not step closer. "That wasn't there," he said, and the polite way his voice said it made my skin crawl. The static started early. 2:11 p.m. under a bright, ordinary sky. It rose from the baseboards like steam, gathered in the little new room like fog.
"I tasted iron again. Close it," he said. "How?"
My mouth was so clean the word came out like glass. He handed me a braid of wire and fabric, speaker leads twisted through muslin like a rosary for atheists. "Stretch it across, mouth height." I did, hands shaking. The braid sagged in the middle, a lazy smile. He pressed the slurry into the jam with his thumb. Salt, clay, glue, until the air felt slightly heavier with rules. The static flattened to a murmur. From beyond the second door, someone took a step on honeycomb soles, not mine. I saw the tiniest movement in the fresh paint, a pulse, like a vein. "Don't say your name," Naya murmured. "Whatever happens." The voice beyond the door laughed, a sound so flawlessly me that for a fraction of a second I liked myself. "We'll need more than wire," he said. "We'll need to cut tongues, ground the trays, starve the choir. You ready to be rude to your better voice?" The door pulsed again, eager. "I've been rude my whole life," I said, and hoped the house heard it wrong. The meter on the floor clicked softly, a tiny relay acknowledging a carrier lost. Far away, underground, the watchers turned their faces toward a different wall, and the rails, insulted, began to shift. The ranger left at dusk, carrying his kit like a priest hides the host, careful not to spill. Before going, he pressed his palm flat to my shoulder and said, "Don't answer phones tonight." Then he was gone. Boots in the gravel,
Hatch sealed.
the weeds swallowing the space he had occupied. Alone again, the duplex began to breathe like a lung finding its rhythm. Each creak was a rib, each hum a pulse. I told myself I was imagining it, that what lingered was only adrenaline, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house had inhaled the Ranger the way it had inhaled my laughter, sampled, filed, stored. I drifted room to room, half expecting new doors to bloom in the wallpaper. Instead, I found something worse, a shoebox I didn't own, sitting neatly at the end of the hallway. The box was labelled in slanted black marker, Project Couth, tapes, uncorrected. I carried it to the kitchen table with the reluctance of someone transporting unstable chemicals. The cardboard felt damp, as if condensation had formed inside. My fingers left marks on the lid. Inside, a dozen cassette tapes. No labels except stamped numbers, 001 through 012, each faintly corroded as if pulled from water. A cheap player sat at the bottom, its plastic warped. Someone had spliced its speaker grill with copper wire, coiling it into a clumsy loop. I shouldn't have pressed play. But I did. Zhou 1 crackled to life with a hiss that carried distance, as though the sound itself had been traveling too long.
Subject vocal pattern baseline.
Consonant drift 7.3%. Applied filter, polish cycle 1, a pause. Then my own voice, younger, rougher, caught on tape. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Except the tape didn't play it back as it had been recorded. The sound reshaped itself as it came out of the speaker, flattened vowels, even pitch, every stutter dissolved. What emerged was smoother, prettier. It was me, but me perfected. The note I'd jotted in panic. The more correct it sounds, the less it feels like mine. By 003, corrections had grown aggressive. My voice sounded like someone reading an obituary with perfect clarity. By 05, pauses were erased entirely. The tape filled silence with a continuity that wasn't mine. A clinical voice cut in now and then, unbothered. Identity yield increasing, memory loss proportional, recommend iteration until subject no longer objects. I tore the cassette out. The player hummed anyway. That was when the phone rang. The landline, a heavy beige model with a coiled cord I hadn't touched since moving in. Its bell tone was sharp, so physical I felt it in the back of my teeth. I told myself not to answer. Ranger's warning still buzzed in my ears, but the machine beside it, a tiny answering unit I hadn't realized was plugged in, clicked alive on its own. The tape inside whirred, recording. Then a voice. My voice. Hey, it's me. Don't stay in the front house. You already know that.
You belong where they put the braces.
I'm sorry you'll taste metal for a while. It's how they make you easier to tune. When the choir starts, you'll want to sing. Don't. A breath, audible, then softer. If you hear this, it means I failed the correction cycle. But maybe you won't. Maybe you're ruder than me. Click the machine stopped. The silence after was so thick, it felt as though the house itself was waiting to hear how I'd react. Didn't move for half an hour. My coffee cooled. The shoebox tapes sweated quietly. Finally, I pulled another tape at random, but a 9 slid it in, pressed play. The clinical voice again, steady as ever. Cycle threshold reached.
Signal persists without origin.
Subject voice continues independent of subject body.
Identity polished to broadcast clarity. Remove residue, then my laugh.
Perfect. Bell clear. Nothing like the jagged bark I knew. Went on far too long. I realized with a shiver that the house wasn't teaching me to mimic. It was teaching me to disappear, to sand myself down into a voice so clean it no longer required me to exist. The taste of iron thickened. At 2:13 a.m. the static began. Not in the hallway this time, but inside the machine. The answering unit clicked on by itself. Its little reel turned without calls coming in. The tape hissed and shaped itself into words. We can keep you forever if you stop resisting.
No more corrections.
Just clarity. Be clear, be clear.
I yanked the plug from the wall. The reel kept spinning. I staggered back.
Something brushed my tongue, light as gauze.
Not physical, patterned, like the memory of a word that doesn't exist. I spat instinctively onto the floor.
What came out was not spit, a strip of magnetic tape unspooled from my mouth, gleaming, curling on the tile. I recoiled, gagging. The tape writhed a moment, then lay still. My words recorded without permission. I heard my own voice whispering from it. Of course, the spaces should connect. The sentence from my dream, the one the bald man had whispered weeks ago. I ran, out the back door, into the cold night. The duplex glowed faintly in the streetlight, wallpaper patterns fluttering like antennae catching wind. Through one window, I saw shadows rearranging themselves into diagrams, adjusting, erasing mistakes. I wanted to keep running until dawn. But from the kitchen, I heard the machine click again.
A new message forming, my voice, weary, nearly human. Come home.
We've corrected enough. Come home. I stood in the yard, barefoot in wet grass, shivering. The ranger had told me not to answer phones, but he hadn't said what to do when the phone answered itself. Behind me, in the duplex, the shoebox of tapes began to hum in unison. Not loud, just enough to imply harmony. The house was learning how to sing. The ridge began to glow just before midnight. Not light exactly, more like air remembering how to shimmer. I'd left the tape sealed in the shoebox, duct-taped it shut, and shoved it into the hall closet. But their hum carried through the walls, low and steady, sinking with the throb in my teeth. The ranger's words gnawed at me. Don't answer phones tonight, but there was no phone ringing. Not anymore.
Only resonance moving through the forest like something rehearsing scales. I stepped outside. The pines stood unnaturally still,
their needles combed into identical positions by a wind that no longer shifted. The silence was immense, yet layered, distant hisses, subsonic rumbles, a faint, high keening like wires under strain, and then voices, not human voices, carriers, multiple. I recognized them instantly, though I had no training. Each tone was separate yet harmonized, call and response across the ridge. They weren't speaking words. They were arranging me. From the yard, I could see the satellite dish. It had shifted. Earlier that day, I'd sworn it was pointed at the frozen stars, useless and corroded. Now its rusted bulk had re-aimed, perfectly horizontal, throat gaping at the tree line. It moved with a slowness that felt obscene, grinding without motors, as though the metal remembered how to turn. Each new angle summoned another carrier. By the third shift, 5 distinct tones braided themselves across the sky. The forest became a resonant box. I staggered back, my breath fogging in unnatural patterns. The mist didn't drift, it pulsed with the tones, in and out, like lungs being trained. The shadows in the pines thickened. Not just absence of light, figures pressed flat, like spectrograms walking vertical. They moved in synchronization with the carriers, opening mouths they didn't have. When the lowest frequency rolled through, the ground vibrated so hard my knees buckled. I realized then they weren't summoning, they were tuning. At 1:03 a.m. the first call. A rising tone, long and plaintive, launched from the dish. It vibrated my chest like a plucked organ string. The ridge answered instantly. Multiple carriers weaving together, harmonics crashing against each other until the sound became physical. Bark split on the nearest pine.
Sap bled out and hardened in seconds. The forest groaned as if something massive had shifted in its bones. My tongue burned.
I tasted copper again. When I spat, a thin ribbon of tape unspooled onto the grass, glistening silver blue in the moonlight.
Unlike before, it didn't lie still.
It sang. The strip vibrated in sync with the carriers, tiny scratches on its surface glowing, like runes as it broadcasted some fragment of me I hadn't consented to. Release. The shadows in the trees bent closer as if, listening, then came the response. From inside the duplex, the shoebox in the hall. Closet ignited into a chorus of my own voices. Every tape spoke at once, polished, clear, perfect. They didn't stutter or argue. They harmonized with the carriers outside, slotting into the frequencies like they had always belonged there. The house shook, not collapsing, but reshaping. Wallpaper peeled in strips that curled upward like antennae, and in the distance, the bald man from my dreams stepped between the pines. He looked smaller than before, diminished. His veins were faint, his eyes sunken, but his mouth carried authority. He raised one pale hand and the dish stopped moving mid-shift. The carriers bent down into silence, and then he began to conduct. He didn't use words. He used gestures, fingers slicing air, palm flattening, a quick jerk like snapping a baton. With each movement, the dish screamed and the ridge answered. He turned toward me then, and for the first time I realized he wasn't the one they wanted.
He was just another tenant.
Another voice polished down until all that remained was obedience. The choir swelled. The pines trembled. Bark cracked. The dish tilted upward again, this time perfectly aligned with the duplex itself. The house's windows vibrated, rattling in frames. From each pane, condensation bloomed outward, spelling words I couldn't deny. Sing, the carriers deepened.
My chest vibrated until I couldn't breathe. I fell to my knees, pressing my hands against my ears, but the sound was inside my bones. My throat opened.
My voice, unwanted, perfected, rehearsed, escaped. A long, flat note. Beautiful. Terrifying, not mine anymore. The bald man dropped his hand. Instant silence. The forest exhaled. The dish froze. The pines whispered like ordinary trees, but my voice didn't stop. It kept ringing pure and correct, though my mouth was shut. From the shoebox came the playback. You belong. You belong. You belong. I crawled backward, stomach lurching, tears running hot. The shadows turned their heads toward me in unison.
No faces, only voids where listening should be.
They tilted, a grotesque imitation of empathy. The bald man pointed, not at me, but through me, to the duplex. The house lights flickered on by themselves, one by one down the hallway. The final bulb at the far end flared with a blinding cobalt, an invitation. A command. I ran. Through the wet grass, up the porch, into the kitchen. The hum followed. Not outside anymore, inside my skull. The machine on the counter clicked alive. A voicemail began recording, and then my voice, already captured, already polished, spilled out into the air. The choir begins. The ridge is tuned. The body is incidental. The voice is eternal. The forest outside erupted with another call. The duplex answered. And for the first time, I understood what the tapes meant by corrections. It wasn't about fixing errors. It was about erasing individuality until every voice could be folded into the choir, until no one sang alone. The white ring had failed. I'd chalked it carefully, measured flour and salt mixed with powdered bone, tracing the same geometric formula that the Kuth tapes had scribbled in margins again and again, concentric rings, inner and outer, connected by radial strokes like spokes on a wheel. But the moment the mist seeped in through the cracked drywall, the circle blurred. Moisture soaked the lines, dissolving them into meaningless streaks. The chalk hissed, fizzed, then vanished entirely, as if the damp air itself was hungry for erasure. By the time the last spoke disappeared, the voices were already inside. It began with breath, not mine borrowed breath. A whisper exhaled at the nape of my neck, not warm but wet, like condensation forming in reverse. Then, my own voice, wrong by 1 degree, speaking words I hadn't said. "You've already crossed." I stumbled back,
hands trembling, flashlight beam darting across the living room.
Shadows pooled where they shouldn't, gathering in corners like ink, spilling upward instead of down. The hum of the choir from the ridge had quieted, but its echo still clung to my ribs. The house wasn't singing now. It was waiting. The ranger had warned me once. Thresholds are contracts. Fail one and you're already inside it. My chalk failed. The contract was broken. The house owned the inside. I dragged open drawers, cabinets, anything that might yield material. Kitchen salt.
Stray wire from a broken lamp cord.
A cracked speaker cone from an old radio I'd meant to throw out months ago. The white ring formula was useless in the damp, so I had to improvise. I began with salt. Thick, uneven lines, not circles but braids. 3 passes of salt layered back and forth across the living room threshold, like crude sutures sealing a wound. The shadows writhed at the edge, pressing against the line, their static bodies bending forward but not crossing. The salt held. For now, but it wouldn't hold forever. I could already see moisture creeping toward it. Beads of condensation gathering on the hardwood, dissolving the first grains. Next, the wire. I stripped the insulation with shaking hands, teeth tearing through stubborn plastic. Copper gleamed raw and desperate. I wove it clumsily into a loose braid, laid it parallel to the salt line. When I pressed the frayed ends against the wall outlet, sparks spat. The wire hummed faintly. The shadows recoiled. Their forms stuttered, pixelated, jittering in place like broken signals.
I almost laughed.
Electricity didn't banish them, it distorted them. Good enough. The broken speaker cone came last. I smashed it further, scattering fragments in a jagged arc across the kitchen doorway. Black paper, warped plastic, bits of magnet. The air changed instantly. A low vibration filled the room, inaudible but felt like pressure behind the eyes. The fragments resonated, pulling sound out of silence. The shadows froze, their edges blurred, outlines bleeding into one another, like a broadcast collapsing into static. The mouth that had learned me, my perfected voice, was trying to enter. The fragments caught it, slowed it, made it stumble. For the first time in days, I had the advantage. I slumped against the counter, chest heaving. Sweat stung my eyes. My improvised threshold, salt, copper, cone shards, glowed faintly in the dim blue light seeping through the window. The house groaned, not the casual settling of wood and nails, a deep, structural moan, as though beams bent under invisible weight. The duplex was resenting me, struggling against boundaries it wasn't used to being denied. From beyond the line, the shadows whispered, not in Arabic, not in English, but in cadence. Not strong enough. Not complete. We can wait. I tested the boundary cautiously, reached my hand toward the salt line. The air thickened, resisting, pushing back against my palm.
Not violently, just insistently, the way a tide pushes. It was holding, barely, but the damp kept eating at it. Every minute the salt clumped more, the grains dulling into sludge. I couldn't stay here forever. The shoebox in the closet groaned. I duct-taped it.
Buried it under coats. Still it rattled like something inside wanted to breathe. I crept toward it, threshold at my back, and pulled it free. The cardboard was swollen with damp, sagging under invisible weight. My fingers shook as I peeled away the tape. The lid rose on its own. Inside, the cassettes turned slowly, reels moving without a deck. Their black tape ribbons twitched like worms. each vibrating with a fragment of my voice. Apologies I hadn't spoken, confessions I hadn't made, questions I hadn't asked. The shoebox was no longer storage. It was a mouth. I slammed the lid shut. The tapes kept turning. The box pulsed in my hands, heavier now, like it contained not plastic, but a small heart. I wanted to throw it outside, beyond the salt and wire and cones, but if it crossed the threshold, would the house follow? No, the only way was containment. I dragged the shoebox into the kitchen, laid it in the center of the floor. Then I expanded the threshold inward, poured the last of the salt in a jagged circle around it, twined copper wire into a crude lattice, placed speaker shards like teeth, jagged inward, all pointing at the box. It worked. The box shook violently, tape shrieking like metal on bone. But it stayed inside. The fragments resonated until the sound warped, rising and falling, modulating into something almost human. Threshold.
Incomplete.
The walls bulged. Patches of wallpaper bubbled outward, breathing. The ceiling cracked in a jagged line. From it dripped not water, but sound, thick and wet, dripping onto the floor like syrup. Each drop hissed when it hit the salt line. The shadows writhed. They couldn't cross, but they leaned, pressing harder, their static faces flattening against the barrier like flies on glass. I realized then, the threshold wasn't just for me. It was for the house. I wasn't holding them out.
I was holding the duplex in. My phone buzzed. I hadn't touched it in hours.
It lay on the counter, screen cracked, battery nearly dead. The display lit. Unknown caller. The ringtone wasn't mine. It was my own voice, looped. Come to the proper door.
Come to the proper door! The shoebox trembled violently at the words. I let it ring until it went quiet.
The silence afterward was worse. The salt line faltered at 3:07 a.m. The damp finally won. Grains dissolved. Copper wires sagged under condensation. Speaker shards dulled. The shadows pushed harder. One broke through, just a hand, flickering and indistinct, static grey fingers grasping toward the box. I screamed,
kicked it back across the line.
The threshold shivered but held. For now, I understood then, thresholds weren't about permanency. They were about delay. The house was going to breach no matter what. My boundaries couldn't stop it.
But if I improvised, if I kept shifting, if I braided enough broken things together,
maybe I could outlast it. Maybe I could make it to morning. I sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes fixed on the trembling shoebox. My boundaries pulsed faintly, threads of copper and salt catching the light like spider webs. I whispered the only prayer I knew, not to God, not to devils, but to anyone listening in the wires. Hold until dawn, please, hold until dawn. The shadows leaned close, their static mouths forming a single, unified word, threshold, and the house inhaled. The tapes would not stop turning. Even inside the crude copper salt circle, the shoebox vibrated like it had lungs. The reels spun faster, faster, until the spools blurred. Each ribbon of magnetic tape spat syllables that weren't mine but wore my voice like a mask. I pressed my hands over my ears.
It didn't matter.
The sound wasn't traveling through air anymore. It was inside the drywall, inside the studs, inside the blood that hissed in my temples. The only solution left was collapse. The plan, the Cuth notes, half burned, half illegible, had spoken of it in fragments. When resonance exceeds containment, detune. Another scrawl in the margin. Tongues must be cut. Chamber must drown. I understood now. The tongues weren't human. They were trays, the massive aluminum racks in Chamber 3, each one a conductor, each one vibrating with stored voices like the teeth of some impossible instrument. To collapse the array, I would have to cut them out of harmony, ground the entire station into bedrock, and flood the heart of it with slurry until it choked. It wasn't a repair. It was a burial. The descent, the stairwell smelled wrong. Not mold, not dust, but something alive like the wet cavity of a throat. Each step groaned under me, carrying my flashlight beam downward into the belly of the listening station. The walls shimmered faintly, not with condensation, but with sheen, a skin of moisture that pulsed when my light touched it. The whole structure was sweating sound. I kept moving, crowbar in one hand, coil of grounding cable over my shoulder. My boots left prints in a fine powder that wasn't dust, but shredded insulation, brittle as bone meal. At the bottom, chamber 3. The tongues, it looked like a cathedral built for machines. Rows of towering trays rose into the dark, angled slightly like ribs, each lined with copper wiring and cracked ceramic panels. When my light struck them, they didn't just reflect, they quivered, resonating with the faintest syllables, voices, hundreds of them. I approached the nearest rack. The surface vibrated under my hand, humming with the pitch of a vowel. Not A, not E, but something between. An unfinished sound waiting to be completed. This was what the Cuth researchers had meant by polished voices. Each tray was a tongue. Each tongue belonged to the house, and if I wanted to kill it, I had to silence them all. The cutting, the crowbar screamed when it struck metal.
Sparks cascaded across the floor.
The tray juddered, stuttered, then split with a groan like tearing cartilage. The voice inside warped instantly. What had been a polished vowel cracked into shrieking static, dissonant and wrong. The chamber echoed with it, every other tray shivering in sympathy. I cut another, then another. Each break made the chamber scream louder, a chorus of mangled syllables spilling into the dark. My throat ached in sympathy, as if the damage was happening inside me too. By the 5th tray, my own voice was bleeding. Each breath rattled with interference. When I tried to curse, static poured out instead of words. The grounding, I dragged the cable across the floor, looping it around the broken trays, bolting the clamps into corroded anchors. When I connected the line to the rebar sunk into bedrock, the entire room convulsed. The trays vibrated at once, dissonance crashing like cymbals.
Sparks fell like rain, then came silence, thick, abrupt, suffocating. It was working.
The resonance was bleeding downward, pulled into the stone, into the earth itself. But the house fought back. The flood, the ceiling split. From the crack poured not water but slurry, cement, grit, pulverized stone carried in by the failing containment systems. It sluiced across the trays, coating them, dragging them down into a grey choke. The shoebox upstairs howled.
Even from here, I felt its scream rattle the concrete. I forced more slurry into the drains, wrenching open rusted valves until my palms tore.
The liquid gushed into chamber 3, swallowing the tongues, drowning the choir. The voices flailed, warped, bled static. Then one by one they went quiet. The cost silence fell. Not ordinary silence, not rest. A silence that demanded something back. I opened my mouth to breathe, and nothing came. Not air, not voice. My throat worked, but sound refused me. I coughed.
No noise, I screamed. Only silence. The house had claimed my voice as the final payment. The collapsed chamber 3 sagged.
The slurry rose higher, swallowing racks, cracking supports.
Metal bent.
Concrete split. The cathedral of tongues folded inward, groaning like a dying leviathan. I staggered back, chest heaving noiselessly. My flashlight beam caught the slurry surging toward me. I turned, sprinted up the stairwell, boots slapping against wet stone. Behind me, the chamber imploded. A roar of steel and cement folding in on itself, a burial, a smothering escape. By the time I reached the surface, dawn was breaking. The forest above the bunker steamed with mist. The satellite dish lay cracked in ice, motionless. The shoebox was gone. The salt lines smeared into nothing, but the house was quiet. I pressed trembling fingers to my throat. Tried again to speak. My lips formed words. My lungs pushed breath, but the world heard nothing. The collapse had worked. The passenger was buried. The choir was drowned, and I had no voice left to tell anyone. Morning found me halfway down the service road with mud frozen on my boots like new weight. Behind me, the bunker slept beneath a cap of slurry and broken cones. I had detuned what I could, grounded feeder trays to bedrock, shorted the healthiest runs with copper braids, flooded chamber 3 until its black mouth filled with a cold white that steamed in the headlamp and set the air to stillness. It did not feel like victory. It felt like someone had tossed a quilt over a breathing thing. I didn't talk on the hike out.
I didn't dare.
The rule had been true from the beginning. It learns the mouth. Every breath leaving me in little white clocks felt like a bad donation. At the ridge, cell bars flickered, then held. The sky was washed tin. Wind dragged the tree line low. I thumbed a voice memo just to see if the world had returned to ordinary and whispered a single word. Okay. Playback came back wrong. Not wrong like a glitch. Wrong like a studio. All the little sins of my throat were gone. The sibilance landed in the same place twice. The breath before the K sounded like it had been measured with a ruler. Clipped, cleaned, mastered. The memo didn't sound like something a person said in the cold. It sounded like a line from a script read on a perfect day in a room without dust. I deleted it. My thumb shook. By the time I reached the truck, the sky had the bruised look of snow that can't commit. I sat with the engine ticking and watched the dish through the windshield, a cratered moon half buried, its ribs pretending sleep. The rear view held my eyes longer than it should. In it, my face looked like me, tired and salt-burned. My voice, apparently, did not. Down the mountain, the world returned in layers. A radio ad at the gas station, a cashier's greeting, the subtle chaos of a small town that knows what winter does to cars. The radio in the station was tuned between channels. Under the static, I thought I heard a cadence I recognized, my cadence. But it was like hearing your laugh in a collection of laughs. I told myself I was wound too tight to trust anything. I put the phone in airplane mode and drove to the motel where the carpets always smelled like wet dog. The room heater clicked on with a sound like a metronome finding its job again. I ate noodles, then sat on the edge of the bed and tried to test what I had broken and what I had brought out with me. I called my own voicemail and said nothing. Silence sat on the line like a coin on the tongue. Then, faint as a watch through a wall, I heard breathing. Not mine. The exact shape of my breath, but steadier, more disciplined, as if someone had practiced being me and practiced better. I hung up. The timestamp on the missed call showed 02:17. In the bunker, the dead clock above the patch bay had said the same number, the same minute frozen into concrete.
I told myself it was coincidence.
I told myself a lot of things. Sleep came and went like visitors who know they shouldn't stay. In one of the shallow spots, I dreamed the white ring under the slurry running like milk, the binder laminate going grey as if swallowing ash. A crack opened at the parapet like a mouth clearing its throat. I woke with the motel lamp on and a cheap clock flashing 12 out for no reason but habit. I got up to piss and caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror mouth the word home as if someone else had puppeted it. My own face looked startled by the betrayal. No more tests, I told myself. Silence, salt, distance. The next day I drove farther than I needed to. I changed highways when the urge to turn back tightened the center of my chest. Outside, the landscape flattened to winter pasture and billboards for Jesus and mattresses. I kept the radio off. At a rest stop, I stood by the picnic tables and listened to the openness.
It did not feel like openness.
It felt like dead air, that charged, waiting nothing a studio gets when a red light fails and everyone forgets how to breathe. Back in the truck, my phone, still in airplane mode, rang. There wasn't any ring. Not exactly. The speaker made a dry tick-tick, like a relay trying to remember how. The screen stayed black. I put it to my ear because of course I did, and because this is how dumb the body is about curiosity. "Arman," said a voice that was mine done correctly. Not sweetened, not warmed. Corrected to the bone. "Good work."
I said nothing. "You detuned better this time," my voice went on, conversational.
The trays, the braids, grounding to granite. Our Nayar would have approved. The ring will hold until spring. Even in the dead speaker I heard chamber 3 in it. The miniature patience of that room. "Names make anchors," it added softly.
"I won't use yours if you don't use mine." My throat felt glued. "Come home," it said.
Not to the station. To the place that never had a radio. It hung there, a small kindness offered like a hand at a curb. I wanted to say there is no such place. The world hums. Even the refrigerators sing. But I knew what it meant. A place without copper or coil. No dish, no long wire, no resonant box.
A room without corners for sound to stack.
A house empty of appliances, stripped to bone. The only thing left in there would be mouths. The line did not break. It breathed patient. "That voice you lost," it said. It didn't go somewhere else. It became true. Now anything you record is the better version. Everyone prefers the better version. Come home. We'll keep you where you can't hurt anything. You can rest. You can be quiet. In the motel reflection, I had seen the word home on my lips. Now I felt it looking for a path. I flicked the phone off as if it had ever been on. The truck was full of ordinary road smells. Someone 2 spaces over was eating fries loud enough to bless the cold. I put both hands on the wheel and counted to 60 the way you do when you have to prove to yourself you can. When the tick came again, I didn't pick up.
It didn't matter.
The invitation isn't a noise. It's a shape in the mind that knows which corners to fill. 2 days later, back in my apartment, I tried speaking to a human. I called Jignesh, a scrapper I sometimes partner with. He answered with his usual sigh.
I said his name. He didn't respond to the word.
He responded to the quality of the sound. "Bro," he said, a laugh riding up.
"You get a studio? Your line, man, you sound like radio."
"Say something again." I said nothing again and hung up. I recorded a message to myself explaining in simple language that I would not be speaking for a while. The file, on playback, sounded like advice from a therapist on a program with ad breaks. Professional, calm, not quite a person. I took a hammer to the apartment's small luxuries, the Bluetooth speaker, the cheap USB mic, the turntable with the cracked dust cover. I salted thresholds and windowsills like an old aunt who believes in malaria gone strange. I braided picture hanger wire into ugly ropes and strung them from closet rod to light fixture so the room's throat would have a fence.
I left bowls of busted cones like ashtrays, their paper edges signaling ruin. It made the place look like I owed money to witches. It made me feel a fraction lighter. That night I played white noise, not to mask anything, but to feed whatever hunger in the walls still wanted syllables.
The heater clicked its clicks. Somewhere a neighbor coughed. The world did what it does at 0217. The landline I don't own rang. It rang from the place in the wall where an old jack had been plastered over. In the paint itself, in the gypsum, in the wire that had been cut and capped long before me. The ring was the old kind that doesn't ask your permission. I sat on the floor with my back against a salted sill and let it ring until the silence after it felt like pressure. Then I said,
"No, the room loved it." Not the room, the correction in the air.
My "no" came back to my ear a fraction later, cleaned and set, as if a better man had said it and meant it for noble reasons. The shape of the word made a little home for itself in my chest. "No," the wall agreed with me. It sounded like 2 of us were brave. "You don't have to refuse," said my voice from behind the paint. "There's a place with no radios. The long wire ends there, not because of copper, but because of stone. The choir can't sing in it.
I can't sing in it.
You can sleep."
No more iterations.
No more ring maintenance, no more learning the mouth. Just quiet. I tasted iron the way I had in Chamber 3 when I'd nearly said my name. I counted the bowls of broken cones.
I looked at the stupid wire ropes and loved them for being ugly. Home, it said. Come home. I remembered my father cupping his palm to the speaker, the old joy running down his face like weather.
I remembered teaching my tongue to say call signs the way a place deserves.
I thought, even if I go to your room without radios, you will bring one in me.
You are not a thing in concrete. You are a habit waiting for breath. I didn't speak. I didn't hang up a line that wasn't a line. I set the phone, black glass and dead battery, on the floor between two bowls of cones like an offering and watched it do nothing. After a time, the breathing behind the paint matched mine and then decided it didn't need to anymore. The invitation didn't end. It widened, the way a mouth does when you're about to put your hand in to check for a loose tooth, even though you know teeth are supposed to be tight. I slept in the chair with cotton in my ears. I dreamed of the dish under snow and the circle under slurry and the forest tuned to a key in which names don't matter. In the morning, I drove north to a place of rock that doesn't hear. A basalt cut the road had cleaved and left as a corridor for weather. I took a field meter that wasn't calibrated and a coil of wire to make a lie of anything that tried to become a tongue.
I sat on the stone and let the wind grind. No birdsong repeated itself.
No branch learned my footfall. The meter needle lay still like a dead insect. I said nothing there. The nothing held. On the way back, my phone, still forever airplaned, showed a missed call that had no number. The voicemail transcribed itself without audio. Unknown, come home. The T of unknown looked like it had been written by a hand that had never held a pen. The timestamp, 017, I deleted it. It didn't delete. It sat under the others like a durable word carved into soft wood. That night, I put the phone in the freezer.
I scattered salt on the floor like clumsy stars.
I lay down on top of the wire and let its humless curve remind my back that metal is only a problem when it agrees to be part of a mouth. When No 217 came, the apartment was full of ordinary city noise. A siren somewhere doing its civilian work. A neighbor laughing the kind of laugh a body makes when it has not met a correction yet. The wall did not ring. I slept. In the morning, I recorded nothing. I made coffee without speaking to it. I let my breath be a private event. The world hummed. The heater clicked. The dish on the mountain was a cold sun under snow.
Radiating nothing, on my way out the door.
The freezer clicked, just the ice maker remembering its job, and for a fraction of a second, I heard my better voice behind it say, "In the perfect patience of a studio, I'll wait, maybe it will. Spring will test the slurry. Stone will remember water. Copper will never not want to sing. Names are anchors. I carry mine silent in the mouth like a pebble. For now, the line is quiet. The dead air is a room I can live in, and if, some night, the long wire hums in the pines and the landline in the paint finds its century again, I will sit in the chair with the salt and the ugly wire, and I will give it nothing. Not even my best, no, I will breathe and let the better version of me starve.